Where it used to be, let's just rid the world of the Jew, and everything's gonna be fine, right? Nobody says that in a polite society today, but what they do say is let's just rid the world of the Jewish state, and then everything will be fine.
Hello and welcome to GZERO World. I'm Ian Bremmer, and today we are charting the startling rise in anti-Semitism, both in the US and globally. From chants of blood and soil at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville in 2017 to the horrific murder of 11 worshipers at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life synagogue in 2018, there's been a marked uptick in anti-Semitic sentiment and violence in recent years. Anti-Semitism is, of course, nothing new, but why is it making a comeback? Here to help me wade through these difficult questions is Israeli actress and activist Noa Tishby, who's served in Israel's government as its anti-Semitism envoy. That was before Prime Minister Netanyahu dismissed her for speaking out against his controversial judicial reform agenda. And later, an early look at a new film about one of Israel's most controversial leaders, Present Prime Minister excluded.
I am not that little girl hiding in the cellar.
But first, the only constants in life: death, taxes, and social media trolls. And I love my trolls, don't get me wrong. In fact, for years, I've featured a troll of the week every Friday afternoon on my Twitter page. And some of them can be quite hurtful. But there are trolls, and then there are trolls. And here are some recent tweets I got. Just another day in our great social media cesspool, right? I do, however, have a minor quibble. I'm not actually Jewish. But if I'm receiving this kind of bile, just imagine what an average day is like for a Jewish person, especially with a decent Twitter following. Blame social media all you want, but anti-Semitism is as old as civilization. An ancient Greek historian in the 2nd century BCE railed against, and I quote, the ridiculous practices of the Jews and the absurdity of their law. Shakespeare's Shylock once asked, "If you prick us, do we not bleed?" But lately, it feels like this particularly ugly trend is back in fashion, and the numbers back that up. The Anti-Defamation League found 3,700 instances of anti-Semitic harassment, vandalism, or assault around the country last year alone. It's the highest number in 43 years. The FBI has also marked an uptick in hate crimes, with nearly 2/3 of all hate crimes targeting Jews.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
You remember the sight of tiki torch-bearing white supremacists marching on Charlottesville back in 2017's Unite the Right rally? Then on October 27 in 2018, a gunman killed 11 worshipers in Pittsburgh's Tree of Life synagogue, the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in U.S. history. In January of 2022, a British citizen radicalized by Islamic extremists walked into a Texas synagogue, took a rabbi and several others hostage. Thanks to the heroism of the rabbi who had received training for such an event, the congregants managed to escape unharmed.
I threw a chair at the gunman, and I headed for the door. And all three of us were able to get out without even a shot being fired.
So how did we get here? Or has the United States always had this ugly undercurrent beneath its surface waiting for the right moment to erupt? To help me wade through these very difficult questions is the Israeli actress, writer, and activist, Noa Tishby, and she joins me now. Noa Tishby, great to see you.
Great to see you as well.
So, not an easy topic that we're talking about today. I mean, I remember the Tree of Life synagogue attack, most violent anti-Semitic attack in U.S. history. And then Anti-Defamation League comes out and says more anti-Semitic attacks in the last year than at any point since
they started measuring?
Okay, so, I mean, you're very familiar with those stats. Why? What accounts for it?
That's a great question. So first of all, the thing to remember is that anti-Semitism is the oldest form of hate and discrimination that is still being practiced today. And you and I were talking off camera for a second before, and you said that you've never got a chance to talk to anybody about anti-Semitism. And that's what's happening. What's happening is that it's so prevalent, it's so pervasive, it's everywhere in our society, but for some reason, people don't give it as much attention. It comes from 3 different areas. Anti-Semitism is on the far right, which is the one that we can identify very easily. It's the Charlottesville. It comes from the far left, which is a little bit more kind of insidious and hard to decipher, which we'll talk about a little bit more, which is equating Israel to Hamas and to terrorist organizations, and it comes from radical Islam. The answer as to why, I can't give you this answer because it's been around for so long. It is so ingrained in our society. What I'm doing in my position in my life, as a part of my life's work, is shedding a light on it so people can actually get present to what it is that they're doing, because a lot of it comes from unconscious biases about the Jewish people.
But
it
I
really
was
does.
taught about the Holocaust when I was a kid. I mean, look, I didn't have any Jewish friends because
You did not have any Jewish friends?
I didn't know any. I didn't.
Until what age?
Probably would have been in high school. I went to a Jewish summer camp of all things, Camp Menorah. I was like
Really?
the one non-Jewish kid. But no, the point was I was certainly aware that there was such a thing
As anti-Semitism?
as anti-Semitism
Because of Holocaust studies.
Of course,
Yeah.
yeah. But I wasn't something that like was discussed particularly in the family. It wasn't something. And then suddenly, right, we're not only are we becoming more aware of it because we're seeing the attacks, but we're also becoming more aware of it because it just seems more ever present in the discourse.
Yes.
It's the attacks on Soros. It's the,
Soros, code word
code
for
word
Jew,
for
absolutely.
Yeah. So look, and I've been like, frankly, I see a lot of the social media trolls against me. I'm not Jewish, but people that are using
You think you're Jewish?
Jew as a I guess I don't know. I mean, I'm
right.
kind of intellectual and kind of a white guy. Maybe that's another way to go after you. I don't know. But so the point is, I want to know where you think it's clearly becoming a bigger problem
Absolutely
today.
bigger.
So why do you think that is?
Again, I'm not entirely sure where this is coming from, because every single person has a bias around the other, right? We've learned this throughout the George Floyd demonstrations. We walk around, you see somebody of a different ethnicity, and you're like, yeah, all right, you immediately have this kind of relationship to that other. And people have the same thing about the Jewish people. So if it's the Jews have all the power, the Jews have all the money, the Jews in Hollywood, they control this, all of that is affecting what people think about the Jews. And with everything that's happening online, I do believe that to some extent the Jews and Israel are kind of patient zero with this. It's coming from something that's very deep in our society. This is not something that I can be like, all right, it's coming from this particular person or that particular person. So I wrote a book about Israel, which as part of the research, I get obsessed with various historical figures. One of them is Josephus, who's a historian that lived around the days of the first Jewish-Roman War in 70 AD. And he moved to Rome after the fall of Jerusalem, and he wrote this book called The Antiquity of the Jews. It was an epic 10-volume book that he wrote as a historian in order to fight pagan anti-Semitism in 74 AD. And when I read that, I'm like, wait, pagan anti-Semitism was so bad in 74 AD that this Jew in Rome felt the need to write about it. And this is what we're dealing with. It has been shape-shifting throughout the generations. And this is where we're at right now. It's the Soros, it's the Rothschild, it's the colonialism, it's all of this rhetoric that we hear. And it's spreading out online like never before. And here's the other thing. Anti-Semitism is not a simple form of racism. Right? So anti-Semitism is anti-Jewish racism, but it's not as simple as any other racism, because when you're racist about any other ethnicity, you think they're less than you, right? You're kind of like, well, they're not as great as me, I'm better than them, right? Anti-Semitism is a shape-shifting conspiracy theory. So it's not just punching down, it's also punching up.
Well, I mean, there's a fair amount of that. Why is the Supreme Court removing affirmative action quotas? In part, that's Harvard and other universities that aren't allowing in as many Asians as there would be, right? So, I mean, there's some of that. I wouldn't say it's unique the way you just described it, only to Jews.
That's true, and that's one of the bonds that we're finding between the Asian community, with number one and number two in hate crimes in America. Because now there's not something. Let's celebrate it if it's here. May as well. So my whole thing, and this is something that I've borrowed from my friend David. Eric Weinstein, who's a brilliant man, and he said the Jews are not overrepresented, they're over-contributing. So yeah, all right, we're over-contributing, but that doesn't mean anything, doesn't have anything to do with control or with overpower.
Do you think it's easier to be openly anti-Semitic in the United States
Yes.
today?
Yeah, I do.
And what do you think the consequences for that need to be?
It breaks my heart that it is easier to be openly anti-Semitic. It's easy to be anti-Semitic on the right, which is more of kind of like the good old classic anti-Semitism of Jews are the controlling, all of that. And it's also very easy to be anti-Semitic on the left. And this is something that not a lot of people feel comfortable discussing, especially from the liberal, and I consider myself on the liberal side of the political map, even though I'm a registered independent. When it comes to anti-Semitism on the left, the majority of it is coming from this disproportionate obsession about the state of Israel. Disproportionate obsession. Now, I am the first person to criticize the Israeli government when need be. Obviously, I lost a position because of that.
In the Netanyahu government.
In the Netanyahu government. This is totally fine to criticize Israeli politicians, Israeli policies, whatever. There's no problem there. But there's a strong sense in the political left right now, in the fringe, and it's becoming more accepted than it used to be, of denying Israel's right to exist. And this is something that, where it used to be, let's just rid the world of the Jew and everything's going to be fine, right? Nobody says that in a polite society today, but what they do say is let's just rid the world of the Jewish state and then everything will be fine. So there's literally, like, in terms of polite societies in America, there's one bastion of colonialism that needs to be eradicated and everything would be okay, and it just happens to be the Jewish state. This is not for nothing that this is happening, and just this country just happens to be Jewish, and people are like saying that it doesn't have the right to exist as other countries do.
I obviously see the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States. I also see Israel as getting more military support from the United States than any other country in the world, and by a long margin. Israel is being by far the most steadfast ally of the United States.
It absolutely is. It should be, and will always continue to be.
Whether it's on the left or on the right, the Democrats, Republicans. So
people that actually work with Israel, they know.
So, I mean, I'm having a hard time. I mean, yeah, I see Marjorie Taylor Greene talk about space lasers, right?
That's the Jews. That's the right wing.
I know, and I see Rashida Tlaib, like, certainly supporting, BDS movement, for example.
Bless her heart, as we say.
But that's very different from people that are saying that Israel should not exist as a country. I have not seen much of that. Do you really see that? How's it expressed?
Go to every college campus in America. Talk to college students and see their experience. This is something, almost every college has apartheid week, in which it's full on a week of slandering the state of Israel with rhetoric that sounds, if you just change the word Zionist to the word Jew, it sounds like 1936 Germany, right? So the Zionists are killing babies, the Jews are drinking Christian blood. And every college student in America is actually experiencing this. Over 50% of college students in America feel the need to hide their Jewish identity. That's not coming from Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's coming from anti-Israel rhetoric.
50% of Jewish
Over
students
50% of Jewish
feel the
college
need
to hide their Jewish
identity.
They will not walk around wearing a Star of David like I do. They just kind of go, we don't want to deal with that. So, by the way, I'm glad that it's nowhere near Congress yet, right? I'm glad that it's not.
It's
nowhere near Congress because, again, once people get into positions of power, once they get educated, once they go to Israel, if you are in any kind of financial sector, any kind of tech sector, if you're a gay LGBTQ plus member of the LGBTQ plus community all over the world, you know that Israel is not the big bad wolf. But if you're on college campus, you have a completely different experience.
So what do you consider to be legitimate expressions of distaste with the politics of the Israeli government? I mean, there have been
many
millions of people demonstrating on the ground in Israel about concerns that they are losing their democracy. Those are mostly Jews.
Yes.
There are Palestinians who feel like their rights have been taken away. What's the line that needs to be drawn that isn't being drawn in your view?
Right to exist. That's the line. So on college campus, when people talk about the Zionist entity and they talk, which is usually it's literally the Ayatollah of Iran's rhetoric. It's the same language, right? They talk about dismantling the Jewish state. So the conversation moved from policies, West Bank, Bibi, yes or no, to, yeah, but is Israel really a state, or is it a colonialist endeavor that needs to be dismantled? And that is actually the reality of Jewish students on campus. This is where the line is drawn. If you have a problem with Israeli policies or politics, there's no problem there whatsoever. But if you actually look at the Jewish people and say they don't have the right for self-determination and self-governance in some parts of their ancestral land, that's where you've crossed the line.
And I mean, that clearly comes from, I suspect, a bunch of people that are saying, well, if the Palestinians are not being allowed or provided that, then why should we support
right, but
that
they usually
Jews
say
in
the
Israel?
Jews are not allowed, then the Palestinians are allowed. That's number one. Number two, as a liberal, it's very challenging to the question needs to be asked, what do the Palestinians want as a political kind of movement? What is it that they're after? Because if they're after a state, then the question is, why is there no state? And this has been kind of put in the forefront, in the doorstep of Israel only. And it also needs to be asked of the Palestinians, why is there no Palestine yet? That's number one. Number two, if they are willing to have a two-state solution eventually, I'm sure there are going to be people on the Israeli side that are going to be willing to have that conversation again. However, if they're going to continue to chant, like a lot of people on college campuses do, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, we're going to keep having this issue. But at the end of the day, Israel wants peace. There's no question there. And if Israel stops fighting, there would be no more Israel. If the Arab world would stop fighting, there'll be peace everywhere.
Noa Tishby.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
In 1973, a coalition of Arab states led by Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on the Israeli-occupied Sinai Peninsula and Golan Heights, sparking the Yom Kippur War. Israel's prime minister at the time was Golda Meir. Her controversial handling of the war is the subject of a new Hollywood film, and GZERO's Alex Clement, he has the story.
It's hard to imagine today, but for a tense few hours in October 1973, Israel faced the prospect of a resounding military defeat. A joint attack by Syria and Egypt had nearly overpowered Israel's badly unprepared troops. Prime Minister Golda Meir, the country's first and still only female leader, took charge over a group of bickering generals and turned the tide. But the existential shock of those initial hours remained. 6 months after the war, Meir resigned.
Today, the Egyptian and Syrian armies launched an offensive against Israel.
Half a century later, Israeli-American filmmaker Guy Nativ has made a new film about Meir and those fateful few days during the Yom Kippur War. He joins us now from Los Angeles. Guy, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
It seems to me that whenever a filmmaker makes a film about a well-known historical figure, the point is to try to change or challenge an existing narrative about that person. For you, what is the story of Golda Meir that you wanted to reframe or challenge or rewrite?
So Golda Meir was the scapegoat of the Yom Kippur War. Everybody thought that she was to blame and she's the only one who's responsible for what happened. But reports that came out 15 years ago made sure that we know that she's not the only one, that the intelligence was responsible for the debacle of the war, and they screw up. So she took the blame. And she had to resign a year later. It was very easy to blame a woman, especially an older woman, for the failure and not have those commanders around her, especially Dayan, Moshe Dayan, to take the blame. She was humble enough and straight enough and honest enough to say, it's on me. But for me, I wanted to bring the new narrative into the cinema.
What aspect of that portrait do you think or hope viewers will find most surprising?
Well, I think there's a lot of stuff that no one knew about Golda. That she had cancer and she had those like secret treatments at night in the hospital. So she, in front of her commanders, she was like the grown-up in charge.
Well, I'm not going to get under the table, but don't let me stop you.
But in secret rooms, in like behind the scenes, she almost collapsed. So I think that it's a view that no one really saw Golda in, like the fragile Golda, the humorous Golda, like the Golda in front of Kissinger, how she's like manipulating him, the relationship with Kissinger in her kitchen.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, the Kissinger scene. It's one of the most extraordinary scenes in the film. When Kissinger goes to Israel to meet with Golda Meir, she has him over to her kitchen, she forces him to eat borscht, and she wrangles these concessions out of him on U.S. support for Israel.
I think it's important that you remember that I am first an American, second I am Secretary of State, and third I am a Jew.
You forget that in Israel we read from right to left.
The dialogue in that scene is amazing. Was it based on actual recollections from Kissinger and Meir, or was it just the work of well-informed imagination in the script writing?
It's a great question. I think it's a mix. It's a mixed kind of a process. And the funny thing is that Liev Schreiber, that plays Kissinger, met with Kissinger, who's 101, in New York. He's in a New York apartment 2 days before the shooting. And he came to the screenwriter, Nicholas, and told him, listen, he told me so many cool things that we got to put it in the script. So that's a line that Kissinger told him, actually.
What was it like to work with Helen Mirren?
It's one thing to work with one of the best actresses of our time. She's the ultimate GOAT. But she's beyond nice. She's like on time. She woke up at 3 a.m. to make the 4 until 7 makeup process for 3 hours. And it's like she's the most dedicated, nicest person that I could work with, but also one of the best actresses of our time. She's a dear friend and amazing person to work with.
As you and I are sitting here speaking, Israel itself is undergoing one of the most profound moments of domestic upheaval, really, in its history. The Netanyahu government is by far the most right-wing government in its history. There have been huge protests against Netanyahu's moves to reduce the power of the Israeli judiciary. In your view, are there lines that can be drawn between the Golda Meir period and the Israel that we see today?
I think it's the polar opposite. I think that if you look at leaders like Golda Meir, Shimon Peres, all those leaders put their trust into the judicial system. So they believe in the high court in Israel. What Benjamin Netanyahu is doing is devastating. I went to demonstrate with my dad, who's a Yom Kippur War veteran, and we met a lot of war veterans, and they all said, this is the Yom Kippur of democracy. This is something that is devastating. I can't sleep at night thinking about what would Golda say, It's like a destruction of everything we built in Israel, and it's terrible, just terrible.
If there's one thing that you want viewers to take away from your film on that note, not about Golda Meir herself, but about Israel in general, what is that one thing?
I think it's the pride, the Israeli pride from the 6-Day War that got slapped, got a big, giant slap. And, this hubris, these commanders that walked like superheroes after the 6-Day War, we controlled the Middle East, and suddenly were devastated by the reality of what's going on in Israel. Before Yom Kippur, Israel thought that they are the biggest in the Middle East and no one can hurt us. But we saw what happened.
Guy Nativ, director of the new film Golda, thank you so much for joining us, and good luck with the film.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
That's our show this week. Come back next week, and if you like what you see, or even if you don't, but you just hate cats, as I do, why don't you take a minute to sign up for our most excellent morning newsletter? It's called GZERO Daily.